You know, I do a lot of cybersecurity work for businesses and governments, all levels, federal all the way down to just the towns, right, and helping them out with cybersecurity. But I also do a lot for individuals and small businesses. So I came up with a security first-aid kit. I know I can say security. Come on. Well, once I get the peanut butter out of my mouth, I'm sure I'll be fine. Yeah, it was in the newsletter this week. It'll also be up on my website, so you can read the detailed document if you would like. But I want you to picture this. You're grabbing a little bit of R&R. You know, it's just hard to do that nowadays. So where do you go? Well, maybe you go when you grab a coffee at a coffee shop. You're sitting there. You got your pumpkin spice if it's that time of year, or maybe some other flavors, right? And paying crazy money for that silly thing at your favorite cafe. You just open up your laptop and you're going to fire off a few emails. You're going to look back at other ones you haven't responded to yet. Maybe you're going to look at some of the social media stuff, maybe some of the stuff for friends. What have they posted? But all of a sudden, bam, you have become a prime target for a hacker. There's a big problem that has been surfacing on and off for quite a while now, where hackers can get a hold of certain keys in your browsers. Now, those keys, they usually get them by hacking your computer. So you got to make sure that that computer is safe. There's a lot of steps. We're going to go through some of them right now. And again, if you go to craigpeterson.com, you can sign up for my email list. And if you are on my list, you've already got this. So just have a look for it, for some of those details. Well, you're a prime target for a hacker, kind of no matter who you are. Google found that their single sign-on thing, you know, where you go to a website that isn't a Google property and you can sign in using your Google account or maybe your Apple account, etc. Well, Google had a problem where the bad guys were stealing these keys. The keys that are used to allow you to log into multiple sites, multiple Google properties that make it a lot easier for you. And if they have those keys, they can now go as you to any of these sites as well where you used a Google single sign-on. So think about that, right? So right now, you're among friends, I hope, right? And boy, I've got exactly what you need to fend off those digital ne'er-do-wells, those hosers that are trying to suck all of your data up. And that's why I put together this, it's a cybersecurity first-aid kit. It's kind of a basic one, right? I'm trying not to make this stuff too confusing. It's like chicken soup for your digital life. It's a tried and true recipe to really help keep those online flu bugs out. Well, first up, folks, don't forget that you're using Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi networks are really kind of cool. You can walk around, you can be almost anywhere. Wi-Fi now lets you have FaceTime calls from literally anywhere in the world if you have the right kind of a data plan, right? And then you hook up via Wi-Fi or potentially Bluetooth to your phone and use a tethering function of that phone, right? So you can use this stuff almost anywhere. And Wi-Fi is compared to just a kind of a big juicy steak you're sitting there, right, for those hosers, and they're angling for an easy snack. It's really that important. So the current recommendation is not to use an open Wi-Fi system at all. But most of them are open Wi-Fis when you go out and get that coffee. You might have noticed a warning, particularly if you're using a more secure computer or a smartphone, etc. The warning saying, hey, this is an open Wi-Fi, and that means other people can see you, other people can scan you. Just this week, I did a scan on 3 different locations from the inside of one of my clients' sites. Well, obviously, multiple sites, right? And just to find out what is running, what is available. So what I did is I have some software that checks every computer, checks every potential service that computer could have, and then produces a nice little report for me so I can go back and look at, is this legitimate? Should it really have file services turned on or DNS or or a web server, right? All of those types of things. Now, if you're on a public Wi-Fi, the bad guys can do that. So they find a service, and then from that service, they have a look. In fact, there's software that does this automatically and says, oh, that one has these vulnerabilities, and now you can find out how to exploit those vulnerabilities. And usually there's even software that you can get for free with just a couple of Google queries that allow you to compromise another computer. And of course, in this case, we're not talking about you compromising a computer. We're talking about the hosers compromising a computer, right? So don't be a sitting duck. You got to up your game. Now, we've talked about passwords before. There's a really kind of a cool article I read recently about Troy Hunt. Troy Hunt is the guy who started haveibeenpwned.com, and he started it about a decade ago. And it's interesting to read his history and some of the different major hacks that he's seen. But what he's done is he's taken these massive databases of people's usernames and passwords that came from hacks and has compiled it in such a way that you can go and you can say, hey, here's my email address. Does anybody know anything about me out there? And it'll go ahead and look for stuff the bad guys have on you. It'll tell you, hey, they've got your password, they've got your home address, they've got your sex, they've got your credit card number, social security, whatever it is they have and where it was stolen. So the passwords are ever so important, and the basic clever passwords are no longer any good. And that's another nice thing about what Troy Hunt has done here, right? So if you go to haveibeenpwned.com, HAVEIBEENPWNED.com. There's on the top, there's a tab you can hit that says passwords, and you can hit that and then type in your favorite passwords, and it'll tell you if that password has been used elsewhere and subsequently stolen. Now, that's important because of what's called password stuffing. We're not going to get into that stuff right now. We're going through our little kit. So next up, of course, Stronger Passwords is that one. Use a password manager. 1Password, the digit 1password.com is the only one I recommend right now. There's a key role, too, in software updates. The major patches coming out of Redmond for Microsoft and from Apple and Cupertino on weekly basis, right? Microsoft doesn't have as many patches as Apple does because they batch them all up into one patch a month, which means you are exposed for the average would be 15 days. Thank you, Redmond. But, it looks better, right? This is the kind of stuff they do. Apple, of course, when they have something that needs to go out, it goes out, and it's very rare that the Apple patches break anything. And we just had, in the last couple of months, we had a couple of big patch problems thanks to Microsoft, and we disabled some of the Microsoft patches, and we had to do some workarounds for others. It's really kind of crazy, frankly. But when we're talking about software updates, these things are really a biggie, and it's something a lot of folks neglect. So please, these aren't annoying pop-ups to click away. There's your friendly neighborhood street cleaners tidying up your software streets, okay? Regular updates for your operating system and your apps mean less potential vulnerabilities. And you need to make sure when that pop-up comes up saying, hey, I want to install updates, or I need to reboot to install updates, just do it, all right? If you're running a home edition of Microsoft Windows, you cannot put them off for very long. In fact, I don't think you can really put them off at all. If you're using a commercial version of Microsoft Windows, you can actually schedule them and put them off for a week or two. And then what we do for our customers is we have something that's called an RMM, which allows us to schedule on a specific basis. So Microsoft comes out with patches on Tuesdays as a rule. So we usually wait until the weekend in case there's any sort of problems before we apply any patches, right? So the next thing in your recovery toolkit here is data backups. Absolutely the unsung hero of the digital realm. Can you imagine losing all of your data, years of hard work? Maybe it's your retirement. Maybe it's all of the savings. Your business is your retirement, right? That's a scary thought. So make sure you are backing them up like a mouse hoards cheese. You got to educate your employees. If you are a business, if they're on the front line, they've got to know their stuff. It's everything from phishing through social engineering. We should talk about that sometime, but where they pretend there's somebody else. Maybe they pretend that they are your IT people. Multi-factor authentication. Look out at duo.com, DUO, Delta, Uniform, Oscar.com. This is the superhero multi-factor authentication. This is what I use. This is what my clients use. Okay, it's phenomenal. It's a shield. It's a second layer of security, much stronger than a mere text message. Firewalls and antivirus, they work in common, and nowadays antivirus is not even close to being near enough. 60% of breaches are now caused by other types of hacks. It's not a virus that they're putting in there. They're using tools that Microsoft put in that are just as leaky as a sieve. Well, it is Microsoft when it comes to cybersecurity. There's just terrible stuff they've done. Let's see here. And Microsoft comes with Windows, comes with a firewall, and guess what? It's not doing anything. It's letting anything through anything. It's just crazy. I'm coming up with something. Keep an eye out this year that is going to fix these configurations that Microsoft doesn't want to bother having to support, okay? Anyhow, it's online. Make sure you get my newsletter, CraigPeterson.com. Sign up right now, CraigPeterson.com. Hey, picture this. You're sitting at home. You've had that wonderful dinner. Maybe you're watching TV, watching the news, or Chicago Fire, or Chicago PD, or Chicago Med, right? Or Chicago Justice. Whatever your favorite show is that's on TV. And you're sitting there debating if you should have ice cream or pie. You know, ice cream, Ben & Jerry's, they're not a great company, right? They do all kinds of things to support some of the anti-freedom stuff that's out there, and yet they call it freedom. Anyways, be that as it may, what should you do? Which is the superior dessert? And then all of a sudden, you're swamped with dessert-related ads. How rude, right? Well, now, shouldn't have Apple locked this stuff down like Fort Knox? We've talked about this so many times over history. It's probably one of the top, I know it's one of the top questions, maybe the top question I'm asked by people. You know, hey, we were talking about this, and, all of a sudden we got all of these ads for it. And the reasoning that I've seen for it before is that, well, yeah, here's what's happening. The marketers know you so well, and they know your social circle, who your friends are. They've literally built maps of all of this stuff. And so if somebody's talking about buying whatever it might be, you know that another friend is doing it too. Or in this case, where you're talking about apple pie versus Blue Bunny ice cream, then you're obviously at dinner time, and then everybody eats about the same time, right? I saw a study saying that the average dinner is eaten at 6:18 p.m. throughout the United States. So you can kind of see if you're normal or not, right? Or at least average. But is that what's really been going on? Well, when it comes to data privacy, Apple is tighter than a miser's purse strings. They've been very good about it. They've had a lot of advertisers complaining about it. They got rid of the way cookies used to work just to try and protect your privacy. So is Siri somehow playing a double agent, folks? No, don't worry. Apple stated this is a clear violation of their App Store guidelines. I can almost hear my fourth grade teacher slamming down the ruler on the desk and making her point there. Yeah, you see, Apple has software that scans the software that's submitted to the App Store. That's part of the reason Apple keeps, like 30% of the sale that's made there on the App Store. It's, hey, we've got this whole environment. We've made it safe. We're not allowing side loading. So we're trying to keep you safe from yourself buying apps from stores that might not be so good, might be malicious, right? So here comes the tech part. I want you to stick with me because it's simpler than you might think. When apps want to eavesdrop on you, they must request explicit user consent. That's legalese for you got to ask nicely, okay? And remember, friends, Apple claims no app can get all up in your microphone or your camera's business without your permission. I bet you had a few aha moments there. When you see that little orange light on the screen of your smartphone, of your iPhone, it's a little orange light. There's also a red light. It's not a light per se. It's a little circle that is drawn on the display when you have been granted permission, or the app has been, right? So probably when you're filling your weekly crossword and you just, okay, whatever, I got to get back to my crossword, right? But you can turn it off. Remember, the name of the game here is consent. If they don't ask, it's not cool. And if Apple finds out about it, they will remove them from the App Store. And since Apple has that nice little orange or red, I think there might be a green light as well, it's up in the upper right-hand side of your display, Apple's kind of expecting you to double check to make sure that they're not being bad guys out there against you, okay? So Apple's sticking to its guns. They're claiming that in this case, this Cox, I should say, media group might just be twisting some vague terms to make a mountain out of a molehill. You know, sprinkling a little dash of Wizard of Oz smoke and a big curtain that's hanging up there, trying to convince us they have magical powers when it's all smoke and mirrors. Okay, so there are multiple layers of privacy built into the iPhone. That's why I recommend it over any of the Android phones. Android phones, there's just issue after issue. But the biggest problem is that they are made by hundreds of different manufacturers. And inside there are thousands of parts. And, you know, there's fewer parts than there used to be, right? They don't have discrete transistors. At least I hope your smartphone doesn't have those in there. But when you're looking at it, it's really kind of bundles. So they'll buy a wireless chip that they'll put into the phone. Apple does this too. And that wireless chip provides you with a radio. Did you know that? Your smartphone can almost always get radio, although you don't have access to the radio. Because it tends to be kind of staticky and a lot of interference. So they say, okay, we're not going to do it. But radio, Wi-Fi, cellular phones, cellular data, right? All of that's built into it. So we'll just stick with that one chip for now. Obviously, there's a lot of other components. There's the main processor. There's all of the memory. There's all of the GPUs. There's the graphics display, all of that stuff. But we'll just stick with that one wireless chip that's in there right now. So in Apple's case, they've probably only used, I think it is probably close to about 2 or 3 dozen different wireless chips over the years. So all they have to worry about are device drivers for 2 or 3 dozen wireless chips. This is the whole concept of a walled garden that Apple enforces, folks. So Apple says, hey, we're keeping you safe. We've got this wall up. Don't try and break down the wall, please. And we're going to keep it safe. So they can control everything that's inside the garden. With Android, Google makes the Android operating system. They provide it then to a smartphone vendor. And then that smartphone vendor has to make a smartphone. So instead of having a few dozen of these wireless chips that the manufacturer has to worry about now, ultimately there could be hundreds. Google would have to worry about thousands of them when you consider all of the devices that have Android. Your car might have Android in it. Even if you've got Apple CarPlay, it still might have Android running some of the systems inside the car. Light bulbs have Android in it, right? All of these Internet of Things devices have it. It's everywhere. So Google cannot do a software update or a software patch and then provide it to you the next day. It can't happen. Right? Okay, people, I hear you arguing, well, there's the Pixel, right? And can't we just, Pixel, we get it right from Google? Well, yeah, the Pixel, more or less, right? But that's it. That's the only one that Google's particularly worried about. So you've got that phone. It was made by a manufacturer. Google releases an update. They provide the update to the manufacturer, who now has to go in and make sure that it has third-party drivers that work with all of the versions of its phones and all of the parts within the phone, including the wireless chip, the display, the memory, the CPU, everything else. You see where I'm going with that, friends? You know, it gets to be a bit of a problem. So when we're talking about security in general, you're going to find your Apple is going to be better. And CMG, Local Solutions, well, they're still playing cloak and dagger, claiming they got some secret weapons with partners like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. Well, I'll keep an eye on this. Bottom line is they're not supposed to be spying on you, and they're probably not, frankly. Sign up. Make sure you get my newsletter with this and so much more for free, CraigPeterson.com. Hey, you know, things aren't always what they look like they might be, and it gets a little murky when we're talking about the world of AI. You know, it's exciting. We've been following it for a long time. Interest, of course, came really to head when ChatGPT 3 came out, and it has just been amazing. It has changed so many jobs. I think some businesses have really jumped the gun on it, though, getting rid of some of the writers and other people. You know, it does make people more efficient. But again, if they're more efficient, maybe they don't need as many of them. We've seen a lot of layoffs in the tech world over the last year plus, really. And some of it is because of AI. Yeah, AI can help improve the performance of programmers, maybe about 30% from the numbers that I've seen. Some say 40%, which might be true too. But what does this mean? Are we going to lose our jobs? I saw one prediction of 300 million jobs lost due to AI. You know, that's basically every job in the United States lost to AI. Now, that's a real big deal. Now, Reuters had an interesting article out that I included in my newsletter. Can you imagine a world where artificial intelligence, our beloved little AI coworkers, make jobs instead of taking them away? They had some really good ideas there. And they were quoting a gentleman who's the outgoing CEO of Mahindra. Now, you might have heard of them before. Of course, Mahindra, they make tractors, right? You might remember advertisements. Rush was a big advertiser of theirs. And they are really, they're in 100 different countries. They make a lot of things, and particularly focused in on the automotive industry. But they also make some other stuff, like some of the trucks and other things. Mahindra's really been at it for quite a while now. Very big company. So their outgoing CEO kind of spilled the beans on AI, because you can bet they are looking at it. We're talking about a business here that is worth, what is it here? I pulled it up earlier, $19 billion. So, you know, it's a pretty big business when you get down to it. So they've been paying a lot of attention. Mahindra also has a consulting arm over there in India that is used by a lot of U.S. companies, a lot of companies worldwide, to figure out what they should do next. So he knows of what he speaks, bottom line. Well, let's break this down. Who among you guys thinks that automation means pink slips? Send me an email. Let me know. I'd love to know your opinion. What's happened in your company? in your business out there? Have people been laid off specifically because of AI, where their job might have been eliminated by AI? I can see it in some manufacturing jobs where there already are a lot of jobs have been eliminated due to just automation in general. But how about the regular workers, right? Workaday workers that aren't just moving, turning a wrench or doing some other physical labor out there? Send me an email, me@craigpeterson.com. I'd love to hear from you. me@craigpeterson.com. So no judgment. I want you guys to be honest here. Well, who thinks automation means pink slips? Well, my friends, I don't think you could be further from the truth. And this counterintuitive news really highlights how AI could be, frankly, a knight in shining armor, breathing new life into all kinds of industries, redefining jobs on a massive scale. That I will agree with, right? They're not going to be job eliminations per se, but job redefinitions, as has always been the case whenever there's a big change, a new change in technology, isn't it? Now, this is crucial, especially for all my non-tech whiz listeners here. Embrace these AIs. Don't fear the technology. Learn the technology. Play with it. You can get a free account on Bard. You can use various versions of ChatGPT, OpenAI, over on Bing. Play with it. Get to know it. It might just be the key to, frankly, a shiny new future promotion, or better yet, maybe a thrilling career switch. Most people aren't that happy in their careers. The average worker, I think now, 3 different careers over their lifetime? Careers, not just jobs, whole careers, unlike me. Is it making sense so far? So I want you to think about what this could mean for you, for your job, for your company. Does this get intriguing? I thought so, because there's so many potential opportunities that we haven't even seen yet. Now, here's a twist for you. What if the real hosers weren't the people who were hacking or phishing, but those people who were resisting this wave of change, terrifyingly named AI? Kind of an ironic thing, isn't it, here? But I digress. We're going to talk about some solutions, not just ruffle feathers here, but it is a big thing, and it will ultimately be a very good thing, I think. I agree, again, with Elon Musk on this, where he sees the future, because of AI, being ever so much better than the past has been. So how does cybersecurity come into play with this? So let me tell you, my friends, how essential cybersecurity is in this brave new AI-dominated world. We have already been seeing phishing for years, but now phishing, I hate to use this term, but it's on steroids because of AI. They're using AI to trick you into doing things, into pretending they're your friend, to pretending they're your boss, and they can generate these emails that they're sending out en masse for a penny or less a piece. It's just crazy here. So we need to have kind of like sunscreen for your tech, right? You wouldn't go sunbathing, laying out in a beach in Florida without good SPF protection, now would you? Well, it's the same thing. You don't want to, in business, when we're talking about cyberspace, we don't want to go without having a protective shield. And let's talk about what a couple of those things are. And of course, you can find out a whole lot more if you take a look at my article that was in my newsletter that's titled Cybersecurity First-Aid Kit, Immediate Actions. And man, there are some real immediate actions in there. But look at Cisco Umbrella. Absolutely. Go to opendns.com if you are a home user. They have versions for families, and it will help to stop you if you click on a link that was generated by one of these hosers that's trying to attack you. It will stop you from being able to get to that website. It's that simple. And Cisco Umbrella is the higher level, the business versions, right? All you business moguls out there, you should be using Umbrella. We use it with every last one of our clients. No two ways about it. It is so important in this AI age. Configuring two-factor authentication. Use Duo, duo.com, and make sure if you're using Windows that Windows Defender is active and up to date. Take all of the patches, right? So there's a lot to think about here, but I want you to think about AI through a good light, what it can do to help. Really what AI is going to do is much the same thing that the assembly line did for Henry Ford and for all Americans. It made something that had been out of reach for most people, the automobile, available for even the people who were working that assembly line. And that's what AI is going to do. A lot of the mundane work, the background work is going to be done by AI. Now, okay, I think that might produce some other problems, like having people who really don't know what they're doing anymore because they don't understand the behind the scenes. But I think AI ultimately is going to be a good thing. And you should read this article I sent out, again, from Reuters, from the ex-CEO of Mahindra. Make sure you are on my email list so that you get my future newsletters, craigpeterson.com. So have you ever heard of the term cookies? Not the sugary delights that, you have for birthdays and Christmas and Hanukkah and all of the other celebrations out there. But, they do make the taste buds do a happy dance. Mine are kind of right now, I'm salivating just thinking about cookies. No, I'm referring to internet cookies, specifically Google's what are called third-party cookies. And if you've used the internet, and I believe you have, you're going to want to hear this. First of all, what are the third-party cookies? If you go to a website and the website is using cookies, it's using them for a few different things. One, to help you navigate throughout the website. So if you don't have any cookies enabled, or you're using a very old browser like NSC, Mosaic, way back then. You're not going to be able to have a good experience on websites because you're talking to a website, and the way your browser talks to it is it says, give me this. Okay, give me this. Okay, give me this. Newer browsers, the newer protocols that actually ask for a bunch of things at once, right, in order to speed things up. But that's behind the scenes. Doesn't really matter. So the web server that you're asking, your browser is asking for these pages from, or the video, or the picture, that web server doesn't really know what you're doing, where you're at, or what you're looking for. It doesn't really know. It uses cookies for that. So it tells the browser, okay, browser, I want you to remember that the user was on page 1 and then they went to page 10 and went to page 15. So that the next time you as a user ask for a page, or you say, I want to go back a page, using the navigation buttons in the website, not the ones on your browser, the website's going to know, the server's going to know, oh, okay, so he's on session number blah, 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 and so he just said, I'm going to go back. That means I need to show him this page, right? So there's very perfectly legitimate reasons for cookies. They were put in place for those very legitimate reasons. And then what happened is marketers figured out, I can put a cookie onto a web browser and use that to remember what that user looked for. So what happens is many websites, mine included, by the way, have a Facebook cookie on them. They might have a Google cookie. They might have other cookies on the website. And that cookie then keeps track of what you looked at on the website. I actually don't use those cookies. I've always had in the back of my mind this desire. I really want to use the cookies so I can highly personalize the experience for everybody and make life good for all involved, right? But I've never gotten around to it. So I got the cookies. I'm just not using the data. However, Facebook is certainly using the data, and Facebook knows what pages you went to on my website. Google would know if I had Google cookies, et cetera, right? Now what we're talking about is a third-party cookie. So you're on my website, and if my website sets a cookie on the website so I can keep track of what you're doing so that you have a good experience on my website, not even so that I can market anything to you, that's one thing. When we're talking about having cookies on my website from Google or Facebook or someone else, now we're talking about third-party cookies. So that's what Google is making a major change on. And by the way, Apple Safari made a major change about this over a year ago to make it much harder for marketers to track you while you're online. This is not a hoser thing. Well, I guess marketers are trying to suck money out of your wallet too, right? But it's very directly a thing for marketers. So it's a privacy issue. And people who have been complaining about cookies forever, misunderstanding their use. And as you might have heard me say before, I'd love to have ads for a pickup truck when I'm looking to buy a pickup truck. I don't want to see ads about things I don't care about, right? Bottom line. I don't want to see ads for things that my wife's looking for, or my kids, or someone else in the office, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you have been using third-party cookies if you've been on the internet. Guaranteed, okay? So Google's finally pulling the plug on these things. Bet you didn't see that coming, right? Google, who makes its money by sucking up every possible thing it can in order to sell it to someone else, is making it harder. That makes sense to you? Interesting. So to kick these cookies out the door, Google's got a new feature called tracking protection. Doesn't that sound friendly, wonderful, warm? It's kind of fuzzy, isn't it? Tracking protection. It's a bit like having your own digital bodyguard to fend off prying eyes. Thing is, this isn't just for the tech savvy among us. This is for everyone. So listen close. Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? And the answer is, like it is with so many other things, it's very complicated, all right? So what's changing, you ask? Well, let's look at it this way. When you're online shopping for your favorite Hawaiian shirt, hey, I don't see your recent purchases, so, this is just an example, Hawaiian shirt. You may notice similar shirts that are popping up on other websites that you visit. So that's your friendly neighborhood third-party cookie at work, monitoring your web behavior and serving digital ads to match. From now on, this tracking protection feature aims to, in Google's word, give users the option to browse with more privacy, unquote. This doesn't mean you'll stop seeing ads. Instead, it's more like saying you're going to see ads, but we promise we won't remember what you did last summer. The cookie's sudden death means that the brands are going to be thrown a curveball. It's going to hurt their ability to market to you and to other people. And when I say brands, talking about the big guys, it's like everything else, right? Amazon was all around. Let's tax the internet. They were behind it. We need to tax it. We need to make it fair for local merchants, right? Because someone can go online and buy something and not pay sales tax, and that's hurting local merchants. Well, I'm sure it did to a degree. But what they were really doing by pushing for an internet sales tax is Amazon was big enough and is big enough to be able to take into account, handle all the accounting necessary for the 9,000, literally 9,000 plus taxing jurisdictions in the United States. But your little neighborhood store, they're not able to, are they? So what happens if there's an internet tax stuff passed? Well, now your little store isn't going to be able to compete at all with Amazon because they can't afford a team of lawyers and accountants to file the paperwork with 9,000 taxing jurisdictions out there. So what would end up happening is they're going to have to go to another third party who's going to do all of that for them for a fee, and there goes their profit margin, right? So that's why Amazon's behind it. That's why Google is behind this as well, okay? those little guys are not going to be able to handle this anywhere near as well as the big guys. And the change that Apple made here with not just the Safari browser, but also with their email to block a lot of the ad tracking hurt a lot of businesses out there. Frankly, including mine, because if you get my email, I send the email out on Monday morning, usually, right? And then sometimes I'll send, most weeks, I'll resend it to the people that did not open the email on Wednesday. So occasionally I get a note from somebody. All you have to do is hit reply to the email and it comes to me. So give me time, okay? I was like 2 months behind on answering emails over the holidays. So give me time and I'll get back to you. But sometimes I get a note from people on my email list that get my newsletter every week saying, whoa, wait a minute, I'm getting 2 copies of this. Well, that's because the software I use to send the newsletter does not know that you had already opened the email. And part of the reason for that is because of what Apple did to stop the tracking. And they have a whole bunch of stuff in there so that it makes it very hard for you to be tracked. Okay. So it's already hurt. What Apple did is already hurt little guys like me, right? I'm just a little guy. Heck, I'm doing this for free, right? I don't get paid to do this. I get very little business out of this because most listeners are not small businesses that really want some help with their cybersecurity, right? They're using their nephew or niece, or they're using some local company that hopefully is providing them, enough service and protection. Okay, so I pay for this. It costs me about $600 a month just to send emails to everybody on the list. Okay, so it's hurt me as somebody who does it out of the goodness of my heart, who's trying to track what people are interested in so that I can prepare materials that you guys would like. Okay, so yeah, I said okay a lot, didn't I? So this cookie sudden death is really a curveball problem, and it's going to require a major shift in the entire marketing world, a whole new approach. And marketers need to quit obsessing over tracking and measuring every minute detail. It will no longer be possible, okay? Even the most advanced AI can't tell us what the individual consumer is really thinking. So what they're going to do essentially is put us into buckets. So there will be maybe a few hundred people in this bucket, and everyone in that bucket is interested in Craig Peterson's radio show, in cybersecurity and technology and Apple and Samsung and blah, 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 right? And then a marketer can say, I want to advertise to people in this bucket. So, yeah, they might have put you in a bucket with Hawaiian shirt owners, but the ads are going to be a lot less specific to you. I don't think this is such a great idea, but it's going to happen. But it might be reversed. I expect European regulators and others to kick Google in the pants and stop this new practice of theirs. Hey, join up right now, CraigPeterson.com. It's free. You probably notice if you're a subscriber to the newsletter that you can just hit reply and ask a question or even schedule a meeting. I set aside some time every week to do free work and consulting for people. So sometimes I'll actually get on their machines like I did with Jeans here recently and help her figure out, was her email hacked? What can she do? How can she recover her accounts? It was really quite a mess, and I was so impressed with her. She's 85 years old and was kind of downplaying herself a little bit, and I don't think she should have been, because she certainly understood the computers much better than many people. But it brings up the point about how confusing it is nowadays because of how good the hosers have gotten. So these hosers are out there trying to suck up your data so they can suck up your money from the account, right? Running a hose into your gas tank, taking everything they can, and that's a real problem. And it's a particular problem for seniors, for business people. And I've had clients that have come to me that have had their entire operating account emptied. And I've told on the show here before the story of Olga over in Eastern Europe who managed to steal $45 million from this one company. Now, that's a lot, right? You look at that, you hear that, and you say, yeah, well, that's not me, right? Well, of course, not. In most cases, it's not. But they use similar techniques just to get into your bank account to get a few hundred or even a few $1,000s. A very good friend of mine, again, he's older than I am, but he is pretty competent with computers. But he got confused because you look at these things and you have to shake your head. I see it all of the time, even with younger kids. There have been some studies out there that talk about how the young generations, the under 30-year-olds, have even less concern about whether or not something's legitimate online than we do, than any of the older generations. They'll go ahead and trade personal information for a donut. I remember that study some years ago. Stuff that you and I might not. But then comes in the problem of, is this legitimate? It was giving this information too personal. What might the bad guys do with it? What should I do? And that's a question we get all of the time, and particularly on the business side, where they're trying to protect stuff, but at the same time, that information has to be used for them to do their jobs. And businesses have personal information on you and me and other customers of theirs. So what's going to happen? How are you going to deal with this? It gets really confusing very, very quickly. So we've got to be careful when we're talking about the whole business email compromise thing and what should you do, what shouldn't you do. You probably know the basics. You don't want to give your account number to someone. I'm going to get a little more basic than that. You do not want to give any information to someone who reached out to you. It kind of reminds me of Dr. Hawkins. I was reading Dr. David Hawkins, one of his books, and his first job was out on the streets. He was selling roofing for homes and selling siding and various other little home repair things. And he was a young guy. He was, I think, about 20 years old, and this would have been back in the 40s. And the things were a little tough back then, 40s and 50s. And there were a lot of door-to-door salesmen. And people would let the salesmen in from time to time. A lot of people, you kind of feel obliged. It's a hot day. You offer them some water or whatever it might be. And they come in and then they sell you something. Most of us don't say no. Let me put it this way. I'm getting that backwards. Most of us say no to a salesperson because we don't want to be tempted to buy, as opposed to be sold. And, a lot of people put it as, we don't want to be sold. And I can see that wording, and I can see how that wording would make sense. But in reality, we're afraid we're going to get sold because they've obviously got a pretty good proposition or they wouldn't be in business. And on our side, we're sitting there saying, well, I've got this limited pile of cash and I've got to pay my bills this month and, inflation and I don't have that greater job and all of the things that go through people's minds come to play. So Dr. Hawkins was out there and getting rejected at every door, and he was doing everything right. He looked around, and the other guys that were selling roofing door to door all had on nice pants and a shirt and tie and a jacket and would knock on the door and get rejected immediately. And then he realized what he needed to do in order to get into the homes to talk to the homeowners is look different. Not look like a salesman, but look like a contractor. And I know contractors that are using this today. What he did was he dressed up in bib overalls and a little dirty. His hands were a little dirty. He was a little unclean, if you will. Hair was a mess. And he had in his pocket a ruler and a tape and a hammer hanging off the side. And he made himself look like someone who would work on a roof, even though he wasn't someone who would be working on the roof. He was someone who would be selling it and getting the team out. Now, people would see him at the door and open the door. Okay, well, this is strange. What's going on? This is obviously not a door-to-door sales guy. And he would then talk to them, come in and say, hey, I am a contractor in the area, and I noticed you have this problem on your roof, and I had some extra material. I'm not sure if you'd want me to fix it or not. So he didn't look like a sales guy. He didn't sound like a sales guy. And he would make his quota, daily quota, by noon easily every day by changing all of that. Now, the reason I told you that story about Dr. Hawkins, who went on to be a clinical psychiatrist, by the way, is that that's what these hosers are doing. They are trying to look like something that is at least innocuous, if not something that you would expect to work on your roof. Or in these cases, it's from the bank. It's from a client. It's from your boss. It's from someone else that you need to respond to. And they do this by faking the return address on the email. And they do that also by playing around with the links that are in the email. They might register a domain that's very similar to, maybe it's your bank, maybe it's YouTube or somebody else. Oftentimes it's something smaller, but they mess with the domain and they register it, and now they go off and try and con you into sending them money somehow. So with a business email compromise, what they're often trying to do is get your banking information or get into your email account and have a look at the invoices that your business sends out. So that what they can do then is take your invoice, change it up a little bit, maybe put a new date on it and a new invoice number, and then also maybe change the amount, but more likely they'll leave the amount alone. And once they're into your email box, they know what the next step is. The next step is, okay, I've got the invoice, I've modified the invoice, I even have the email address that invoice was sent to by this legitimate company. So now what do? They go ahead and they send that invoice off to that person, or maybe multiple companies, to get them to pay it. And many companies don't pay a ton of attention to the invoices that are coming in, because what they should do is make sure they follow up with anything that's different, anything that's odd, anything that's strange. So that follow-up means, wait a minute now, they're changing their bank account number that they want us to send the money into. Typically, that's an ACH transaction is what it's called. And wait a minute now, maybe I should pick up the phone and call my vendor who sent me the invoice and make sure that that's legitimate. That is such a common practice nowadays by the hosers who are trying to get you to do these things. That's why they want to compromise your email account if you're a business person. If you're an individual, the number one thing that they're trying to do is, again, get access to your bank accounts. But they're not going to find invoices in your email that you're sending out to vendors. But what they're hoping to do is find your bank having sent you email. And you say, well, why does that matter, Craig? Of course the bank sends me email. My bank is TD Bank, whatever it might be. And I get email from them about balances and things. There's no account information in there, is there? Oh, no. So what do I need to worry about? Well, there is a lot to worry about, because there's a lot they can do once they gain access to your email account. So we're going to talk about that and what the whole deal is behind that and why they want access to your bank account. All right. How do they get that? Just from an email from the bank saying that your statement's ready. Well, we'll talk about that. I also want to talk a little bit more about what you can do here. I put a big article in the newsletter. It's up on my website, the latest on business email compromise. And this is talking about a quick way that hosers are destroying your businesses, and they're living high on the hog at your expense. You can find it online, craigpeterson.com. So why do the bad guys want access to your personal email account? Well, they can do something like what happened with my buddy, where they got his email account, and then he was delivering food for, these home delivery companies. And he, of course, got emails, and those emails had in them his statement, right? And it had, this is how much you made, and he gets paid, and they deposit it directly into his account. Isn't that all well and good? His email did not have the account number in it. But what happened is he's delivering for DoorDash and I think one other, and they send an email. Well, the bad guys got into his email account. They changed the password on the email account. Now, they don't always do that. These hosers realize that if they change your password, you're going to immediately notice something's going on. What they'd rather do is keep an eye on your email box, because here's what they do next. They go ahead and say, okay, he's working for DoorDash. This email account is what he's using as his account name at DoorDash. And that's one of the reasons I do not like the requirement of having to use your email address as your account name or account login. So they knew, okay, it's xyz at gmail.com, for instance. Not picking on Google here at all. And then they reached out to DoorDash and said, hey, I need to change my account number to deposit money in. So now I'm going to conflate a bunch of different stories together to give you kind of the most common way of doing it. And I don't want to throw DoorDash under the bus here either. But what happens next typically is the bad guys will open one of these bank accounts that's designed for transients. You know how we have a lot of illegal aliens in the country? Migrants, as some people call them. Well, those migrants need a way to put their money from that they're paid under the table because they can't work legally into that bank account. So they can have a whole bunch of different banks now that offer that type of a service where you don't have to prove who you are, where you're from, where you live, all the stuff that you and I have to do. No. All they have to do is open the account. So these bad guys, these people that are overseas even, will go ahead and set up one of these bank accounts in the U.S., perfectly legitimate bank account, with no way to trace it. It's insane, people, what we're doing in order to coddle these illegal immigrants, right? We used to be a nation of laws. That's what set us apart. But I digress. So now they've got access to your email. They've sent an email off to your employer, and they've asked to change your direct deposit account so that it deposits it into the bank that's used by these illegals, and the money was going in there. He lost 2 paychecks that way, and he called up and tried to figure out what was going on, right? So we'll just leave the story right there. He was made whole, and everything was great. But you can't track that money. It's shocking to me. It's absolutely shocking how badly now we are handling this whole illegal immigrant problem. When the first thing you do coming to a country that supposedly has a basis in law, and so that laws are governing what we should not be doing, not men, but laws, the first thing that you do is you break a law coming into a country governed by laws. That just tells you the whole story right there, doesn't it? So they put that money into that bank account that they opened without any real verification at all about who they were. And then that money typically gets transferred. Now, this is where mules come in. You might have seen, the course, Dinesh D'Souza's movie about the mules, and Clint Eastwood had one too, Mule. It was a really good movie if you haven't seen it. I think it's worth seeing. But the mules in this case are people in the U.S. who have been conned. into, in some cases they know that they're doing something illegal, but into doing something illegal, which is they will take that money out of that bank account that was set up by that obviously illegal person, right, who's a hoser stealing money from people. And then they will take it and put it into, let's say, a PayPal account. And then another person is monitoring that PayPal account. And when the money comes in there, they'll transfer it to another account. So the mules move the money around, Americans, a few times. And then it gets sent out of the country. We have been arresting mules. So if you are doing something like that or have been tempted to, be careful. Because once it hits American hands, it's a little easier to trace, even using these bank accounts that are set up so illegals can use them and have a bank account, right? Because, my goodness, they need a bank account too, don't they? So that's kind of the way it worked with my friend. And I kind of pulled together some facts from a couple of different cases to give you more or less the normal way of doing it. The other way of doing it that they do all of the time is they realize, okay, your bank is TD Bank. So what do they do now? Well, they realize that because they see the emails that came from TD Bank, Bank of America, Citizens, whatever your local bank is. And they now know that you have an account there. Well, as I said earlier, what is your account name on the bank? Now, I know Bank of America lets you use an account name, so I do. I make up a name. I mean, totally made up. Couple of random words stuck together. That's my account name, or a few in some cases, which is similar to how I create passwords. So I will go to the bank, right, and to log in, and I put in my account name. That works really well because if they've got access to my email and they know the email address, so Craig at craigpeterson.com, for instance, or my business email, Craig at mainstream.net, but that Craig at craigpeterson.com email address now, they'll go ahead and try and log in with that over at the bank. And it's not going to work because I don't use my email address. So that's the very, very first firewall of 3 firewalls I use when I'm dealing with banks, etc. If you're using the email address for your bank, what they'll do now is they'll go to your bank, they'll enter in your email address as the login name, and then they'll click on Forgot My Password. What happens next? Well, the bank is going to likely send you an email with a link that you can click on to reset the password on your bank account. So now they are just monitoring your email account. The bank sends that email. They click on the link. They delete the email so you can't see what just happened. Although if you were to dig into it, you'd see in your sent box what happened and your trash can if it hadn't been emptied. And now they have full access to your bank account. So there's a bunch of really good things to learn from what I've just discussed here in the last 2 segments. Review it. You can listen to it online at craigpeterson.com/podcast. Find this podcast and we'll go from there, right? So we've got more coming up, of course, so stick around. We're going to move on right here. craigpeterson.com. This whole idea of subscriptions for cars has been around for a while now, and it's getting a little bit out of hand. Some of the car companies have backed down on it, others haven't. Some are planning on introducing it and have not introduced it yet. If you've been buying software for a while, you know, you go and you buy the latest version of Windows, you buy Office 2019, you buy all of this different software. But the way things have gone in the Microsoft world now, pretty much everything is pay by the month. And that's actually not a bad way to do it. It's easy. You can get free updates. It just goes on and on. Now, Microsoft does not take good care of you. That's a completely different issue here. Car manufacturers have been looking at trying to do the same thing, and some of them have. BMW, Volvo, and many other high-end car makers, and really kind of lower ones too, including, I think, Nissan did this same trick, are saying, hey, you want to use heated seats? No problem. You can pay us monthly for those heated seats. Now, a lot of people argue, hey, wait a minute, I paid for that heated seat, obviously, when I bought the car, because it was built into the car. It was already there. This was not a retrofit. And that's an argument that's been used for a long time in other industries as well. I remember IBM, they still do this to this day. It's cheaper for a company to make a single model that has all of the same stuff in it, but not necessarily turn on the features for you, than it is to try and keep track of, okay, well, this one needs heated seats, this one needs a rear view camera, this one needs this type of glass, etc., etc. And IBM found the same thing. In fact, in the 60s and on, you buy a mainframe. And that mainframe would probably come with maybe a little more memory than you had ordered, or more storage or CPU power. And digital equipment did the same thing. They would come out, if you did an upgrade, they'd come out with a magic key and put the key in. Think of this as a golden key. Put the key into the computer, turn the switch, and all of a sudden, ta-da, your computer just doubled its capacity. They didn't bring any equipment in. No, obviously they would have to at one point. I remember upgrading our IBM 360, and it was a 360-30, and upgrading to, I'm trying to remember how much memory it was. I think it might have been 92 megabytes, and it took 2 guys to roll it in. It was huge. It was a huge rack of core memory. So they rolled this thing in and set it all up, and off you go. You're off and running. But other things were accessed via this key, and that same thing is true today. A lot of software that you buy, you upgrade it, and in fact, nothing really changed. All that happened was a software key was installed to make it work better. Think of demos. How many pieces of demo software have you downloaded? And it's fully functional, except maybe it's going to, if it's a video editor, it's going to put a little watermark on top of the video it exports, or maybe you can only use it for so many hours, right? There's a lot of different things that it does, or that companies do. And then when it's time, you've bought it, they just authorize it, right? Install a key. So the car manufacturers are doing that same thing. But in some cases, the car manufacturers are charging you for the heated seat up front when you buy the car, and then they're trying to charge you a monthly usage fee for using the feature that you literally already paid for. It's not like it's built into the car already. No, it's a brand new feature. So doesn't that get to be a bit of a problem at some point somehow, right? Well, obviously it does. And that's why there's been a lot of pushback. Tesla is a car that is completely controlled by software. Volvo started doing that a few years ago as well, which is one of the main reasons I did not like Volvos. Now, the computer would override the driver based on what the computer thought. So, for instance, it used to be you turn the steering wheel, and that steering wheel is connected through a number of mechanical mechanisms to the actual wheels themselves. So when you're turning that steering wheel, even if the car is off, you could turn it. It might be hard, right? Think of the old trucks without power steering. But you could still do it because there is a direct mechanical linkage between that steering wheel and the front wheels. Same thing with the brakes. Nowadays, of course, for many years, we've had hydraulic brake systems, but you can still push down the brake. There's a mechanical linkage to the master valve, right, master cylinder, and that now puts a pressure on the brakes, and the brakes will still work. Mechanical linkage. Same thing with the gas pedal, the fuel, the accelerator. You push that down, and there's a rod, a mechanical linkage that goes up to the fuel injector. Of course, before that, we didn't have fuel injectors, but before that, it would connect to the carburetor, right? And it would change things so the car would go faster, get more fuel to the engine. Pretty much all of the cars today use various types of drive-by-wire. You might remember Toyota having a huge problem because the brakes were controlled by computer, and occasionally you'd be stopped at a light with your foot on the brake, and the car would leap forward and jump into the intersection for you. You know, what the heck, oncoming traffic, T-bones, yeah, that sort of thing. GM had a similar problem. Do you remember their V864 engine? Well, that did much the same thing, right? It would shut off cylinders in order to save fuel. This is during the fuel crisis of Jimmy Carter. It's this with Democrat presidents and fuel crises. And anyways, they ended up pulling that whole engine back. And it goes back, the first case I'm aware of was a machine that took x-rays. And it was computer controlled, so you get the right dosage. But the computer, much like the Toyota software with the brake pedal, the computer in this x-ray machine had what's called a stack overflow and was killing people. Yeah, fun, eh? So now our cars are run by computers. Cars like Tesla's, these electric cars, completely run by computers. So even though you've got a steering wheel, you got the brakes, you got the accelerator, none of them actually do what you think they are doing anymore. That steering wheel just tells the computer, hey, I want to turn right, and I want to turn right this much. This is how aggressive I want to be with my right-hand turn. The same thing, the left-hand turn, or I hit the brakes, and it says, oh, okay, he wants to hit the brakes. And they do some kind of cool things, like if you hit the brakes really rapidly, but not terribly hard, the computer will interpret that and say, wait a minute, I bet you he wanted to hit the brakes even harder, so I'm going to actually hit the brakes harder than he hit them, and it overrides you. And in that case, it might save your life. It's been proven to actually be pretty good. But how about those cars now when you're going around a corner? Let's say you're going in a straight line and you want to avoid something in the road ahead, so you turn the steering wheel hard, and the car overrides you. Because the computer says, wait a minute, you're going to generate more than 1 G of lateral force. So I don't care if you want to turn that steering wheel hard. I'm going to ignore you. We got more on this coming right up. Stick around, CraigPeterson.com. Electric cars all have this drive-by-wire completely. Mechanical cars, if you will, internal combustion engines, trucks, all have it built in now. It's very rare to see any mechanical linkages going from the driver of the vehicle to the actual components of the car that are actually doing the work, right? And there's some nice things about it. I mentioned the override, but there's some problems too. For instance, even with things like traction control or anti-lock brakes. Let's say you're trying to brake on sand and you need to stop quickly. Well, your anti-lock brakes are not going to allow you to stop quickly, because they're going to say, wait a minute, I'm sliding. The better way to handle this on sand, the braking, is to slam on the brakes and let the sand pile up in front of your wheel in order to stop abruptly. But the computer doesn't know that. Well, they're getting a little bit better. We'll see as time goes on. But you see, these things are all double-edged swords, and Tesla is kind of the biggest sword target out there, if you will. So there's a lot of hackers who have been hacking cars. We saw Chrysler, for instance, where you could take over and remotely drive a car right off the road. Yeah, a bad guy, a hacker could. We've seen times where the police now have these little remote-controlled cars, kind of like kids play with, and they have basically an EMP inside of them, electromagnetic pulse mechanism, and they drive underneath the car, and they set it off, and that completely disables the computer, burns it out in many cases, and the car stops. I don't use that very often. How about the cars that have the wonderful GM OnStar system in them, which are remotely monitored and can be remotely stopped, unlocked, right? All of these types of things. So, for instance, the police say, yeah, we're following this GM car, and they're not yielding as quickly as we want them to, or maybe they'll never yield. So they just contact OnStar and ta-da, go through the mechanisms, and the engine will start slowing the car down. Hopefully the person pulls over to the side of the road, but, so you can be stopped. You can be tracked. And there are movements afoot right now to do exactly that at the state level for taxes. You're driving on a road, theoretically, the gas tax pays for the roads. Of course, we know they use that money for many other things. But what if you're in a car that doesn't use gas? So there have been a lot of proposals out there. A lot of states now have decided to just charge you, if you have an electric car, an extra $200 a year as kind of a road tax to make up for it. Other states, like Massachusetts, has said, hey, here's what we'll do. There's computers in the cars, and the computers record all this wonderful information. So when you have that mandatory car inspection, we're going to download everything from your computer, and we're going to have a look at it, and we're going to charge you based on how many miles you drove. Well, of course, you didn't necessarily drive all those miles en masse, right? And the computers don't necessarily know that, but the lawmakers are trying to require that now. So the computers actually track everywhere you went and keep that almost forever. And that's what you might see in a GPS, for instance. Your last few locations where you've gone a little while, but now it's more and more. Teslas actually upload gigabytes worth of data per day sometimes, if you've been driving your Tesla car up to Tesla, where it is keeping track of everywhere you drove and is keeping track of all of that GPS information. And they're using that to figure out where the roads are, get detailed maps. Because if you've studied cartography at all, you know that the companies that publish maps put purposely wrong information in them. They even, there's some great stories about how they've even had fake town put into a map. And the idea is, well, if someone steals our maps and republishes them or, changes it, makes it look like it's theirs, but this town appears or this distance is the same because we made it up, it's not real, then we know they stole that information. So you can't really trust those physical maps to be highly accurate. But if you're going to have a self-driving car, you not only need sensors that can see the road, that can see obstructions, you also need to be able to know exactly where the road is, at least according to the GPS up there. Can you imagine what had happened with these self-driving cars if the GPS satellite system went down? We know it's easily jammable. I mean, easily jammable. And I've got an article in my newsletter that turns out it's surprisingly easy to hack into a satellite. These low Earth satellites, think like Elon Musk's Starlink. So, good luck. Anyways, I digress. So the Tesla has all of this software, and you can get upgrades on your Tesla. So you can get speed upgrades. It has ludicrous mode, which is kind of cool. I like Mount Brooks too. And they have a lot of other little features. They have games and things in it. And it gets updates potentially daily from Tesla for the software. It's uploading information about your driving that day so that they can use that to help train the AI. Let's call it artificial intelligence. Yeah, I'm not going to get into that argument right now about what exactly it is. And they then download all that information with new software onto the computers in your Tesla car. Okay, so Tesla charges you monthly, depending on what you're using, what you're doing. They might charge you an upgrade charge. Certainly this autonomous driving has been an upgrade for a long time, although it's not technically autonomous. And a lot of people are saying, hey, don't worry about it because, you know, the driver is being monitored. Ford has its own autonomous system. Many of the other guys have it. GM certainly does. I'm not sure about Chrysler. They must have it. But it's okay because we're monitoring that driver. Well, I remember my mom, she got a Honda. This was years ago, the little roller skate Honda. And this was up in the Great White North, up in Canada. And it had a thing in it so that if you didn't have your seatbelt on, an alarm would go off. It's just this totally annoying buzzer that never timed out and was always buzzing. So if there's any weight at all, I took like 5 or 10 pounds of weight in that passenger seat, for instance, like she put groceries there or her purse there, the alarm would go off and would not stop. Isn't that fun? Yeah. So what did I do for her? Well, I reverse engineered how that system worked and disabled it. Snip, snip, all set. So how about that Tesla? How about these other autonomous or semi-autonomous vehicles out there? Well, the same type of thing can happen. And I've got an article from electric.co. That's the name of the website. And these guys have a great little article on how hackers managed to completely unlock the Tesla software. So they were able to unlock features that were worth up to $15,000, right? Free heated seats, full self-driving package, because all of that is in the car to begin with, okay? These are software locked features or unlocked, depending on how you want to look at it. So they were able to do that. Effectively what I did to my mom's little Honda roller skate back in the day. And it's an issue, right? It's a real issue because they effectively jailbroke the Tesla. And you can bet that there'll be more of this as time goes on. So now do we need more laws about jailbreaking? Of course, under the DMCA, Digital Communications and Millennial Act, it's illegal to hack anything, as though that's going to stop anybody. But now you've got these right to repair laws that are spreading somewhat across the country. There's pros and cons to them. Well, how about me upgrading my software or completely replacing the software in my car? You know, these guys that have slightly older cars, that have fuel injection, that maybe want a little more horsepower out of the car, they go ahead and they replace the chips that control the fuel injection, that control the engine. Maybe they replace the chips that control the transmission. And the whole idea there is to change the curves that are being used by those systems so that they can get some more speed out of the vehicle. Well, right to repair says, yeah, you can do that. You can, depending on the law, you can repair your car. You can replace all of the software. It's your car. You own it. But things have been changing so that it's not your car anymore. You don't own it. So what's going to end up happening? Let's say someone comes up with some better software. How about somebody lobotomizes the Tesla? So that, the computer controls all of your steering and the accelerator and the gas pedal, but you have 100% access to all of the features, and I don't want you tracking me. I don't want you uploading everything I do to the cloud, in Tesla's cloud. I don't want third parties to be able to come by and get that information from my car, maybe use it against me. Kind of goes on and on, right? Well, apparently this Tesla jailbreak, according to these hackers, is unpatchable and allows you to run arbitrary software on at least the infotainment system. So we got some problems. We're going to have to figure this whole thing out, okay? Got to figure it out. All right. Make sure you're on my email list, craigpeterson.com, okay? Let's make all of our lives a little bit more private and a little bit more safe. craigpeterson.com/subscribe.